Well, greetings, and let me welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Dwayne Butcher, and I will serve as your host today. I will introduce today's presenter in one moment, but first a quick note. If you have questions during the presentation, you can submit them using the GoToWebinar toolbar. Also, today's presentation will be made available following the webinar. You can look for an email from me shortly after we conclude. Well, let me introduce today's presenter, Patrick Kraut. Patrick is Senior Master Trainer with the TWI Institute. He began his training career at Sanyo Electric Corporate Training Center in Japan. It was there he learned to deliver TWI to prepare employees for assignment outside of Japan. He is the author of the TWI workbook, Essential Skills for Supervisors, which won the coveted Shingo Prize. And hot off the presses is his latest book, titled Implementing TWI. Both books were co-authored by Bob Rona, also of the TWI Institute. So, without further ado, let me turn things over to Patrick.
Thank you, Dwayne. And thank you to all of our listeners for giving me this opportunity to share with you a wonderful program, TWI Problem Solving. Let me say up front that today, my comments today and also my slides are going to be a repeat, or as someone said before the broadcast, an encore presentation of a webinar we gave just about last year at this time when we were just rolling out problem solving, as well as a presentation I gave at the TWI Summit in May. So if you attended either of those presentations, this will be a good review. And if not, then you're in for a nice surprise to hear about this wonderful program. So let's begin by taking a look at what today's topic is going to be about. We're going to be talking about TWI problem solving as a comprehensive approach to implementing TWI, and we'll look at it from two viewpoints. First of all, we'll compare it to Toyota problem solving, since Toyota is very famous for their problem solving approach. It's very familiar to, I'm sure, many of the listeners. And we'll look at how the two programs compare, and I think we'll see that they both come from the same roots, growing out of that same era in the post-war period when a lot of these programs were developed. And then we'll look at, the second thing we'll do is we'll look at what is the focus of the problem-solving approach to TWI, and that is going after what Toyota likes to call the root cause of a problem. We'll see how the problem-solving approach to TWI tracks that same methodology. And then we'll look at how TWI problem-solving uses the three tools of TWI: job methods improvement, job instruction, and job relations directly for solving problems. So for those of you who are already familiar with the TWI programs, you'll see how we can leverage these great skills. If you're new to TWI, you'll get a quick view of what those programs entail. And then finally, TWI problem-solving approach does include some additional analysis tools and techniques, and we'll see how that gets integrated into the problem-solving approach. Before we get into the details, though, it's always a good idea to take a look at the background so that you know where this program is coming from. If you know or if you're familiar with the history of TWI, you know that it was developed during World War II, right here in the United States. And of course it was developed in order to win the war, that war of production. And we don't have time today to go into all of the details, but if you are interested or you're not familiar with that, if you go to the TWI Institute website, you can see that down there at the address down at the bottom of the slide. There's plenty of good reading material on the background of TWI and how it was instrumental in helping us to win the war, World War II. But after the war finished, Lowell Mellon, who was one of the TWI reps during the war out of Cleveland, he formed a company. He wanted to continue the success of TWI and keep it alive and keep it growing. He formed a company which he called TWI Inc. And then in the post-war period, when General MacArthur and the occupation forces in Japan were introducing TWI and many other programs into the Japanese industry, TWI Inc. Won the contract to begin training in Japan. That was in 1951. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. TWI made a big impression, a big splash when it was introduced in Japan. So much so that it was an influential piece of what became, the Japanese resurgence in manufacturing, and then what we call TPS or Lean today formed the roots of many of the programs that we're practicing today, still used in companies like Toyota. I learned it when I was working for Sanyo, and we did TWI very extensively. That was back in the 80s when we were growing and expanding overseas. And so it had a big influence in Japan, the work that Lowell Mellon and his group did. Well, they had such a success that the Japanese government asked TWI Inc. if they could create a problem-solving training program. And of course they did, and that's the program that I'm going to introduce to you today. And needless to say, because it was from TWI, it followed the TWI tools and TWI methodology. Well, how important was TWI in Japan? Let's just take a look, just to kind of contrast and show where Japanese business, how far they've come, since TWI was introduced there. And here's some comments that I picked out of the final report that was given, that was made by TWI Inc. in 1956. And let's just read through this. I think you'll be surprised at what the impressions of Japanese business at the time was. The final report said that it was apparent to anyone in close contact with Japanese business, at the time, that the Japanese are many, many years behind the West. Now, keep in mind this is written in 1956, so things turned around after that. But they're many, many years behind the West in their thinking about problems of organization and management. In fact, many times it appears that they have done no thinking at all, at least not logically. Pretty strong statement. In fact, after we delivered this program last year, I did get an email, a comment from someone who said, gee, doesn't that seem a little bit culturally insensitive or not politically correct? And I agree. But again, I'm just quoting, from the actual report that was written there. But I left that in there because I just want to kind of show the contrast of how far the Japanese have come. But actually, the report goes on. Here's the part we want to look at, the need for problem solving. So the report went on to state that this means that at all supervisory levels below the very top, there's a reluctance to accept responsibility for anything. There's always a constant crisis and waiting for someone to make a decision, to come up with the answer to anything. The final result is that the average Japanese supervisor is a very, very frustrated individual who hardly knows which way to turn. Well, I can tell you, by the time I got to Japan in 1980 and started working for Sanyo, the supervisors I worked with in many, many Sanyo factories, they knew which way to turn, and they were not waiting for anyone to come up with a decision or an answer for them to do. They knew exactly what they needed to get done, and of course we had one success after another. And I should say at that time, this TWI problem-solving course was a key part of our training regimen. It was a big part of our program that we were promoting throughout Sanyo, and it had a great impact. Well, just to keep things balanced, let's take a look at the other side. Now, this is a comment more recently, just from last year, looking at some of our companies, in this case GM. It says, this is a comment from the New York Times, that when GM collapsed last year and turned to the government for an emergency bailout, its century-old way of conducting business was laid bare with all its flaws in plain sight. Decisions were made, if at all, at a glacial pace, bogged down by endless committees, reports, and reviews that astonished members of President Obama's Auto Task Force. Well, boy, if you can astonish some Washington bureaucrats, then things must have been going pretty poorly. But you can see that this idea of decision-making, how far it has come, and maybe how much more work we need to do on our side in order to come up with problem-solving and good decision-making to resolve the problems that we face. Well, let's get into the material then. The year before last at our TWI Institute, at our TWI Summit, David Meier, you may be familiar with his works. He's written a lot on Toyota, the Toyota Way, and Toyota Talent, and so on. But David Meier was speaking on Toyota problem-solving. He trains Toyota problem-solving. And so he gave some insights into what Toyota problem-solving is about. And in particular, he stressed the fact that a big part of the reason why we're not having much or or maybe having limited success with lean is that, as Americans in particular, we typically tend to go straight to the answer, or as he liked to say it, we always want to jump to solutions. In other words, we may not really know what the problem is, but boy, do we have an answer for it. So, we go for answers before we actually know what the problems are. And so he talked and stressed about keeping a long-term vision. In other words, we have to have a strategy for solving problems. In our country, we often tend to jump to the tactical approach. In other words, we're always looking for tools that we can apply. If I can just use that tool, that'll be the answer to my problems. But what's missing is a strategy for execution. And we have to have an approach, David said, we have to have an approach to things that are based on principles. So they took a much higher level view of problem solving. So let's compare, with that in mind, with that viewpoint, or that difference in viewpoint, let's compare the Toyota problem solving steps. There are the 8 steps that David Meier gave us to Toyota problem solving. I just wrote them just as he gave them. And on the right-hand side here, we see the TWI problem solving steps, the 4 steps to problem solving. Now, of course, in TWI, we follow the TWI methodology, a 4-step method. So you'll see that methodology running throughout problem solving as well as the way it's done with the other basic courses of JI, JM, and JR. But let's compare these two. If you look, the first 4 items, the first 4 steps in the Toyota problem-solving method basically track, not exactly, but pretty much track step number 1 of TWI problem-solving. They're very similar and kind of go down the same road. In Toyota, step 1 is to clarify the problem and then break down the problem. Step 3 is to set some targets, and then finally getting to the all-important step 4, root cause analysis. But what you'll see if you look at the TWI problem solving is a very similar approach. We call it isolate the problem, and that begins with stating the problem, making a statement of the problem, writing it down, giving proof or evidence of the problem, actually coming up with data to show what that problem is. Now I'm going to go through, in today's presentation, I'm going to go through each of these items in more detail. So let me just kind of cover them. Just give a quick overview, and then we'll look at them in more detail. So we give proof of evidence. We explore the cause, and as you'll see when I go through those more detailed notes, in TWI, when we say explore the cause, what we're saying is to get to the root cause, what Toyota would call getting to the root cause, the very same approach. And then finally, we're going to draw conclusions. Drawing conclusions meaning to come up with which approach we should take towards solving the problem. Now in Toyota, step 5 is to develop countermeasures, and step 6 is to see those countermeasures through. Again, very similar to what you see in steps 2 and 3 of TWI. In step 2, we're going to prepare for the solution, get ready to solve the problem, and in step 3, we're going to actually correct the problem. But what's going to be different here, whereas in the Toyota approach, we kind of take a general high-level overview of what those countermeasures might be or should be or could be. We use a lot of techniques like brainstorming and consensus building and staff development and so on in order to develop those countermeasures. Those are all very good things. On the other hand, though, in TWI, when we get into that countermeasure approach, what we're going to do is we're going to actually utilize our TWI skills. In other words, we're going to deploy our skills of job methods improvement, job instruction, and job relations, and use those skills, activate those skills, implement those skills in order to prepare for a solution and then to correct the problem. So we'll go through those again in detail as we move through today's presentation. Okay, just kind of wrapping up this comparison in Toyota then. Step number 7 is to monitor the results, and just like in TWI step 4, we're going to check and evaluate those results. We want to make sure that we've actually corrected the problem. And then there's this one additional piece in the Toyota problem-solving step, step 8, which is to standardize the successful processes. It's always a good thing. But I believe that this part of standardizing good processes is contained within the TWI practices, when we practice JI, JM, and GR. a part of that is to work in and standardize these methods. So TWI doesn't overlook that process. It actually integrates it into the basic processes or the basic the methods that we use when we roll out TWI or implement TWI. So as you can see, the two methods are very similar. I believe that they come from the same roots. I don't really have any proof of that. I haven't read any history or heard any people who've actually stated that Toyota knew about or used TWI problem solving, but we do know that they were very familiar, especially with JI. Toyota still uses JI today, to some extent JR. They were familiar with also job methods improvement. So I don't know that they were aware of that, but just given the overall history of that period, TWI had a strong influence in the early stages of these methods such as Toyota problem solving. So my guess is that that has some influence, and just because we can see the similarities, my guess would be that there was some influence of TWI, and that just goes to show that even today the methods are very compatible and complementary. And we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. Well, let's go on then. There are many works describing Toyota problem solving, so you can look that up and review those. But for today, then, let's look in more detail at the TWI problem solving method. And whenever we look at TWI methodology, we always like to begin with what we call the 5 needs model. What are the basic needs of good supervisors? And you'll notice there are 2 kinds of knowledge: knowledge of the work, knowing about your business; knowledge of responsibilities, and then skills. 3 kinds of skills: skill in instructing, teaching jobs, skill in improving methods, and skill in leading. And a common element to all of these 5 needs is the aspect of safety. There's a safety component to each of these skills, so that safety is carried out throughout our everyday work that we provide. So what is that work about? As supervisors, we're responsible for providing quality production at the proper cost. And so these 5 needs then are what is going to help us to achieve these responsibilities, these responsibilities of creating good quality production at the proper cost. So when we have good knowledge of our work, when we understand our business, when we keep up to date, with the details of our business, of course this is different for every business that we're in, that's going to help us with meeting those responsibilities. Also, as members of management, we have to know what our responsibilities are, what the rules are, what the rules and regulations are. These, again, are different for each company. But the skills, these 3 skill sets, are regardless of the industry, regardless of the company, these are common to all businesses. We have to have the skill in instructing people on how to do their jobs so that they're able to perform the work and learn the jobs quickly and correctly and conscientiously. And then we need skill in leading, so that when we teach them these jobs, they want to do the work. So creating motivation and cooperation in doing the work is the skill in leading. And then we're always looking at finding better ways. So skill in improving methods helps supervisors then to be able to create better methods so that we can create greater quantities of good quality products in less time, using the resources that we have at hand. And as we do all of those things, of course, we always make sure that everything is done safely. So that's a component to all those needs. So based on that 5 needs model, then that sets up the basic need for those 3 skills, which of course then were answered by the 3 TWI skill sets: job instruction, of course, replying to the skill in instructing need; job relations, answering the skill in leading imperative; and then job methods improvement, replying to the need for better job methods. So once we have those skills, once we have the knowledge, and we're then better able to produce quality production at the proper cost. But even when we have all of these things, needless to say, problems still get in our way, and that's where the need for problem solving comes in. So what is a problem? You know, what you're looking at here is what's oftentimes called the gap analysis, very standard part of our lean learning. But actually, in the original TWI problem-solving manual, there was a very rudimentary model of this gap analysis that was sketched out. TWI problem-solving also begins with this notion that, you know, when we define a problem, what we mean is when the work that we assign fails to produce the expected results, when there's a gap between where we're currently, the situation we're currently at, and where we want it to be. So once we've defined that we have a problem, now we're ready to begin our problem-solving technique. So let's get into step number one. Step number one is to isolate the problem. And there are several items that we need to cover here. So let's take a look at them one by one. The first item was to state the problem. Now here in the TWI approach, we want to first of all define the problem, write it down, and we can pick up problems, you know, that we're currently facing, something that's right in front of us. There may be problems that are newly breaking out or approaching problems that we see coming. So in other words, problems that are in our laps right now. But also the TWI approach encouraged supervisors not only to deal with the problems that are in their hands right now, but to look for and anticipate problems, foresee problems that are coming, reviewing records to see what kinds of potential problems might be coming. And of course, that's a theme that runs through all of the TWI methods, and that is if we can get into problems early, if we can foresee them before they come, they're going to be that much easier to handle. So once we've stated the problems, we can prioritize them in order of importance or necessity, or in terms of how vital it is that they be addressed. And based on that prioritization, we can take them one by one in their order of importance or necessity. Okay, so once we've stated the problem, then we move on to the second point, which is to give proof or evidence of the problem. And here, what the TWI approach wants us to do is to, you know, while we keep an open mind and get lots of feedback and review records and so on, we want to actually spell out in detail what are the facts, what are the circumstances, what are the facts and figures that actually show that we have a problem, to record those things, to record that data down, so that we have specific measurements on, you know, what exactly is going on that we consider to be a problem. Now here, the TWI approach kind of looks at it from two angles, and you'll see this approach throughout the entire method. But we start here by looking at the problem from two angles. One is the mechanical angle, from the point of view of, you know, machines or parts or tools, anything mechanical outside of the people, as contrasted to the other angle, which of course would be the people angle. But from the mechanical angle, you know, when we try to record what kinds of evidence, what kinds of proof we have, you know, some of the things that we can look at would be our schedules. Are we keeping up with our schedules? Are we behind? How about rework and scrap? What are the levels there? Equipment breakdown. What's the data on the equipment usage, or accidents, or anything that has to do with, you know, the mechanical angle of the business. And then we look at also from the people angle. What's going on with the people? And we can get data, we can get facts and figures based on, you know, how is productivity? Is it falling off? Is it going down? What about their levels of knowledge and skill? What's the safety record? Some other things that we try to record may be difficult to put into numbers, but we still try and get a read on, you know, where's the morale, where's the interest, how about job satisfaction? So we actually try and get good data and record these things. We're going to use this data later as we go through the method to see whether we're, you know, finding the correct solutions to the problems, and of course in the end, you know, if we're going to be able to, you know, for example, when we take, you know, our countermeasures, when we take actions on the problems, you know, will this evidence go away, showing that we've taken the right action? Okay, then the next thing to do then in step number one, isolate the problem. The third item would be to explore the cause. And here, of course, this is where we're going to get into our root cause analysis. But we actually want to look for the causes for each and every piece of evidence. So for all of those items that we recorded in the previous section, where we wrote down, actual facts and figures, proof or evidence of problems, we want to explore and find the cause of each and every piece of those evidences. So even as we try to avoid, preconceptions and try not to get into our subjective conclusions, keeping an open mind as we look through that. Again, we're going to look at it from two different angles. We've got the mechanical angle. So when you're looking at from the mechanical angle, the things we'd be looking at are the method. How's the method? Is the work method being properly applied, or are there problems with the method? What about the layout? Could that be done better? Are there problems with the layout, the tools, or the equipment? Are they being properly used or properly applied? Are they properly maintained? The environment standards and so on. So we're going to look at those areas, the usual suspects of where problems might be lying. Then from the people angle as well, we look at whether we have proper job assignments. Do we have the right people on the right jobs? Faulty instruction. Have they been instructed properly? Are they able to do their jobs properly? Are there any human relations concerns, people problems, or personality problems that are coming up? And then we piece these together in a cause and effect relationship, or as the TWI founders like to say, we need to dig down deep. And when they say dig down deep, what they meant was to get to the root cause. So let me show you this next slide. This is a tool. Now, I went through the original TWI problem-solving materials, and I didn't see this. So my guess is that the Japanese developed this tool to help us better get to the root cause. But this tool was there when I was doing problem-solving at San Diego in the early 80s, so it was probably developed pretty early on in the methodology. But this is what we like to call today the chain of causation, because it shows that cause and effect relationship. But what this tool helps us to do is to kind of dig down until we get to the core, the root cause. So I'll put together a simple example here. If you look at it from the left, read it from the left to the right. If we've defined our problem in this example as customers complaining about late deliveries, and then we got some evidence on that problem, let's say our on-time delivery was at 87%, so we have a specific number of where that delivery complaints are coming from. Well, then we're going to look for the causes, both direct and indirect. So the direct causes of why our delivery is at 87%. In this case, was that we had packaging delays, which were creating a bottleneck of finished products. So in other words, the product was finished, but it was waiting in line to get packed. And so if you keep digging now for the indirect, those causes of those causes, what caused that cause, we could find that we had the packaging delays because the delivery of the packaging product has been frequently delayed from the printer. So when we're getting our packaging, our printed product, paper product from the printer, it's coming in late. And so that's what is leading to problems creating a bottleneck of finished product and packaging. Well, if you keep on digging deeper, even under indirect causes, there can be causes of causes. Why is the delivery of packaging product delayed? And if you dig a little deeper, we found that the films from the art department were being held up here at the plant, waiting confirmation. In other words, we couldn't send the artwork to the printer because they were waiting for confirmations. And if you continue digging into those causes of those causes, well, why were they waiting for confirmations? And it could be found that approvals from the corporate side needed to be gotten in order to confirm the correct usage of company logo marks. In other words, the corporate staff, had control of the proper use of the logo marks. They didn't want them used improperly or incorrectly or in the wrong places and so on. There's some guidelines, corporate guidelines, and those needed to be approved from the corporate side. So if you find out, well, why were we waiting for those approvals, and then we get finally then to the core, the root cause of the problem was there was poor communication between corporate marketing and the plants. The communication between the plant and corporate, as some of you may know, is not always good, and that's where the holdup was. So now, if you go through that analysis, we can get to the core or root cause, and as we go through that analysis, this may sound familiar to many of you are familiar with Toyota problem solving. Sure enough, it's very similar to what Toyota likes to call the 5 whys of getting to the root cause. And basically what we do, going through this analysis is, and of course I stylized this to come up with 5 questions. It could be more, maybe less. But as you ask why each of the processes, why do we have the problem, you get the direct cause. And then, why did that happen? And you continue asking why 2, 3, 4, 5 times until you get to the root cause of the problem. And this is what David Meier was saying when he said that, in our country we too often want to jump to solutions. We go for the first evidence of problems and we try to fix that problem when in fact the true problem, the root cause of the problem lies much deeper than that. And if we never get down to that root cause, we'll never be attacking the correct problem. So that's what we mean. So in TWI problem solving as well, when we say we're going to explore the cause, here's the tool that we use. And indeed, what we mean is we want to get down to the root cause, or as the TWI founders like to say, they call it the problem point. What's the problem point? In other words, what's the true fundamental problem that is causing all the problems? That's what we mean when we say explore the cause. All right, then once we've explored the cause and found the root cause, of each and every point of evidence that we found causing the problem, then the final thing to do here in step 1 is to draw conclusions. So we're going to think over these causes. In other words, if we remove that cause, would the evidence go away? And then that shows to us that it's a true root cause of the problem. But the TWI method now goes a little bit further. It looks at those problem points, those root causes. Again, going back to our analysis, is the problem mechanical, is it people, or is it both? And based on that analysis, based on those conclusions, we're going to decide on a plan of solution. So I'm going to show you what that means here in a second, but let me just kind of sum up step number 1. We actually, in TWI problem solving, we have a whole analysis sheet, what we call the problem analysis sheet, which sums up all of the things that we just talked about in step number 1. So you can see at the top, we're going to fill in the problem. Once we state the problem, we fill that in. We're going to look for proof or evidence. It gives us, there it is, some of the usual suspects, as I like to say, from the mechanical angle and then also from the people angle. We can actually just fill in the numbers. We're behind schedule by so many days, so many hours. Rework is up by so many percentage points, and so on. Productivity is down by so much percentage points. So we can actually fill in, what kinds of evidence we have, and then we think about the causes of each of those items of evidence. So the above problems were caused by, and we try to jot in, as we look at things like the method or the layout, the tools, the machines, and so on, from the mechanical angle, or from the people angle, as we look about. We look into, their skills, the instructions, the human relations. What are the causes of those problems? And then here's where we apply that root cause analysis chart, that chain of causation analysis, as we can plug in these causes that we filled in, plug them into that analysis to drive us down to the problem points of the root causes, and that we see at the bottom of the sheet. Now let me just kind of take that bottom of the sheet where it says conclusion and problem points. And here you see that problem point evaluation. So when we get to this last part of step number 1, we're going to identify what those core root causes are. And then here's where we make the judgment, where we draw our conclusions. If it's a mechanical problem, is the problem point that we've identified, is it mechanical? If it's mechanical, then the judgment is going to be to use JM, our job methods, TWI job methods skills, to solve that problem. If it's a people problem, then we look at it from 2 angles. We ask ourselves, is it a people problem because they don't know or can't do? In that case, we use JI to solve the problem. If it's a problem where they don't care or won't do, then we use JR to solve those problems. So that's the evaluation that we're making at the step number 1. Once we get to this point, now we're ready to deploy our TWI skills. So let's move on. Let me just make some concluding remarks for step number 1, then we'll move on to step 2. So step number 1 here, as my mentor, Mr. Shibuya, told us when he taught us this a few years ago, step number 1 is the most important part. In other words, we need to first find out what the problem is, or as the saying goes, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. That's the most important part. If we can define exactly what that problem is, we're halfway there. We use the root cause analysis pattern to find the true causes, and we look for proof or evidence along the way to identify those true causes. By looking at from both mechanical and the people angles, then we can set ourselves up for a good analysis of just which solution path to take based on using our TWI skills. So here's step number 2. Now I realize there's a lot of words on the page here, so we don't need to go through all these. I'm going to talk a little bit about them in more detail, but just to kind of give you an idea of how we set up preparing for solution. You see it's divided in the left-hand side to mechanical problems and then the right-hand side to people problems. And then based on that analysis of people problems, we have the 2 styles of, they don't know or can't do versus they don't care or won't do. So based on that analysis, we're going to use JM, JI, and JR then to prepare for solutions. So let's take a look at them one by one. On the left-hand side, we have mechanical problems. If we've determined that this is a mechanical problem, first of all, now actually before we get into the use of the JM, you notice where it says analyze. The first thing we're going to look at is the overall situation. And in other words, before we get into the details, we're going to use, before we get into the detailed analysis using our job methods skill, we're going to kind of step back for a moment and look at the overall situation and analyze the overall situation. Now here, the TWI problem-solving method actually gave some extra tools. One of them, well, first of all, when we analyze the overall job situation, we want to cast a wide net. So we're going to use things, one of them we call the flow chart or flow diagram. So I have an example of that for you. In other words, the flow chart or the flow diagram were additional tools given to map the routing or location of parts, methods, and so on, materials, and so on. So here's one of the extra tools that the TWI problem-solving course gives, and this is a flowchart. Some of you may recognize this tool. It tries to get a view of the overall process as the materials or as the work flows through the workplace. It uses specific symbols there on the right, for things like operation and transport, inspection, delay, or storage. So it tries to give you an overall view of the work method. Now today we have even more tools which can be employed at this stage. Things like process flow mapping, or just other lean tools that you may have learned about, and all of those things can be deployed at this stage. But the reason being, in order to cast a wide net, we want to get an overall view of where the problems might lie. Now, in this case, if you find where the problem is and you can make the correction, then that can be done right away. But typically, what happens when we look at problems, we analyze it from a wide point of view, and basically that just shows us where the problem is. It kind of points us in the right direction to where the problem is happening. So in those cases, the next thing we need to do then is, once we've identified where the problem lies, then we have to analyze that specific job or situation. Now here's where we get into our TWI job methods skills. So we're going to break down that job using our JM technique. We're going to question all of the details at those problem sources. That's how we prepare to solve mechanical problems. So here we use the job methods breakdown sheet. This is the sheet that came with the problem solving course. It's an abbreviated version of the full job methods breakdown sheet. If you know about job methods, you'll be familiar with that one, that full and detailed breakdown sheet. But here it kind of covers the main things, which are, what are the current method details, and then based on questioning those details, what are our ideas for improving or resolving the problem. And then based on those ideas, then we can come up with our proposed method details. So we have the current method and the proposed method, and we try to come up with ideas on how to solve the problem. In order to do that, we're going to question those details, and here are the infamous 5 W's and 1 H. As we go through all of those details that we've broken down, we ask, why is it necessary? What's its purpose? Where should it be done? When? And by who? and then finally, how is the best way of doing it? By questioning those details, we can come up with ideas that will help us to resolve the problems. Now, pretty much that's for our time today. That's about as much time as I have to go into it. Of course, I'd really like to go with you into much more detail on the actual job methods program, but in order to do that, and I recommend that, is if you go through the full job methods program, the full 10-hour class, you can get in and be able to see all of those details. But in addition to that, the TWI problem-solving method actually gave an additional insight into this. Actually, this 3 parts of a job thing we're looking at here. This is not part of the standard TWI JM 10-hour class, but it gave an additional way of analyzing, and that is by dividing the job into 3 parts. In other words, as we go through the details of the job, we ask ourselves, is this a make-ready detail? In other words, a make-ready detail will be the time taken to get everything ready to work, the placement of materials, parts, or so on. Or is it a do detail? In other words, where actual work gets done, where we're moving towards our main objective. It adds value to the work. Or finally, is it a put-away detail, things that are necessary to complete the job after we do the job. So by analyzing each detail and into these 3 parts, we can ask, well, which ones should we question first? Now, typically here, when I've talked to a lot of people who studied Lean, and when they see this approach, they're a little bit surprised, because they said, well, gee, usually in Lean, what we talk about doing first is getting rid of the waste. We go after the waste or those non-value-added things first. But here, the TWI approach is, no, actually, the first thing we should question are the do details. Because if we've done this simple analysis, and we go after the do details first, and we question whether they're necessary or not, well, if they're not necessary, then all the details concerned with getting ready and putting away to do that do detail, all those details go away at the same time. So it's a much more efficient way of analyzing. However, as we do the analysis, most of our do details do have value. That's why they're there. And so it turns out that the greatest opportunity is for improvement is in the make ready and put away details. Of course, that's where the waste is. And so when we any of these make ready or put away details don't add value to the final product. So when we improve or eliminate those, we do a better job of solving our problems. So those are a couple the ways that the TWI problem solving goes about step number 2 of preparing for solution for mechanical problems. Now let's take a look at the people problems. We said we can divide people problems into different categories of whether the person doesn't know or can't do, or they don't care or won't do. And the reasons why that happens, when we get to this, is we can think of a few reasons. Faulty instruction, they haven't been properly instructed, wrong assignment, they're doing the wrong things which are not suitable to them, or maybe a personality situation, a human situation. And so obviously based on these causes, if it's faulty instruction, we can use our job instruction skills to improve it. If it's a personality situation, then we can use our job relation skills to resolve it. So let's take a look first of all about faulty instruction. Where does faulty instruction come from? It could be insufficient instruction, incorrect instruction, inefficient instruction, or maybe no instruction at all. And why do we have this? Why is our instruction incomplete? And we could look at a big reason for that being little or perhaps no preparation of all. We haven't prepared the instructor, the person teaching the job. We haven't prepared the workplace, and we haven't prepared the learner. And because we haven't done preparation of these 3 critical elements, our instruction is incomplete or does not go well. Of course, to answer these problems, we have the job instruction program. And again, here, boy, I'd love to explain everything to you about job instruction, but that's something that there's a lot more to it than we're going to cover here in the next few minutes. But if you take the job instruction class, the 10-hour class in the 4-step method, it covers all of these points in detail. But just to summarize, how do we get ready to instruct? Well, first of all, we want to make a timetable for training so that we know who to train on which job and by what date. We have a schedule for that. We're going to break down the job, and here you see an example of a breakdown here on the left. Now this is, boy, this is a skill in and of itself. I mean, the skill of breaking down jobs is a critical aspect of being a good trainer or of having good training. And again, in the 10-hour class, we go over how to make this breakdown in detail. But this preparation point is very vital and very critical for good instruction to take place. We break down the job into its important steps and key points, and then identify the reasons for those key points. And once you have a breakdown, you prepare the workplace to set a good example, and then finally prepare the learner. Now this is actually step 1 of the JI 4-step method. If you're familiar with JI, you'll recognize these steps. We're going to put the person at ease, state the job, find out what they know about it, get them interested, and place them in the correct position. So when we cover these points of the job instruction method, we're actually preparing for a solution, getting ready to solve the problem when it comes to a problem of instruction. And finally, we have the problems which are personality situations. And of course, here we're going to use the job relations tool of TWI. And this, of course, fits in pretty well. I mean, you know, in job relations, actually, we talk about the job relations 4-step method, and we say that's how to handle a problem, how to handle a people problem. So job relations is set up specifically for problem solving. And this is step 1 and 2 of job relations. So if you're familiar with job relations, you'll recognize get the facts, be sure you have the whole story, and then weigh and decide. Thinking about what are the possible actions, what are the many possible actions, not just one thing, but what are the many different ways we can go about solving the problem, evaluating those, and then picking the best one. Now these bullet points here that I've put in red, these are actually additional bullet points that were added into the TWI problem solving approach. You don't see these in the JR 10-hour class, but you'll actually see then the strong emphasis they put on, you know, the human element of taking care of our people. So when we do think about what actions we're going to take, you know, we think about what the results are. What's the psychological effect going to be on that person? Can we approach it so that we don't hurt their pride? They're able to save face. So these are some additional areas where supervisors are taught to apply job relations problem solving effectively. And in TWI problem solving, we actually got a form. Again, this is something you don't see in the normal 10-hour job relations class. In fact, in the typical approach to job relations, we tell trainees not to write anything down because, you know, anything that has to do with these personnel or people problems, you know, if you write them down, you get into problems with keeping a record and keeping them on file and so on. But actually, when I teach the class for many, many years, people often ask me, well, you know, you have a breakdown sheet for job methods and you have a breakdown sheet for job instruction. Where's the breakdown sheet for job relations? And in problem solving, they actually put this simple form together. This is kind of like a breakdown sheet, I guess you could call it, for job relations. So we put in the objective, the facts, and the different possible actions down at the bottom that we're going to weigh and decide. So again, we don't have time today to cover all these details, but to really implement all these things that I'm talking about here today properly, a good knowledge and practice, you know, the TWI methods, and by taking the TWI courses is the way to go about it. So that was step number 2, preparing. We're preparing for solution, and now here we have step number 3, correcting the problem. And whereas step number 2 was, you know, the first half of the JI, JM, and JR techniques, and of course here in step number 3 we have the second half of those same techniques, JM on the left, JI in the middle, and JR on the right. So if any of you out there are familiar with one or more of these 4-step methods, you can recognize these parts. These are just the actual 4-step methods for each of these programs. So on the left we have JM. If it's a mechanical problem, we're going to develop the new method. We're going to eliminate, combine, rearrange, and simplify those details of the job based on the ideas that we've come up with in order to resolve the problem at hand. And then we're going to apply the method, making sure that we actually sell it, you know, to our boss, sell it to the operatives, make sure that it actually gets approvals and is able to be put into place. Down the middle, if it's a people problem that can be resolved with instruction, that's using our JI technique. We're going to present the operation, I'm going to tell, show, and illustrate the job one important step at a time. Then we're going to do it again, stressing the key points. Do it yet another time, stressing the reasons for the key points. If they understand it well, we're going to have them try it out, see if they can do it, have them do the job, fixing any errors they may have, having them do it again, explaining back to us the important steps, have them do it again, explain the key points, yet again, explain the reasons for the key points. In those repetitions, each time they do it, they're learning the job, they're making the job their own, they're remembering, the steps and key points and reasons. By that last iteration, it's really becoming their own, and they've grasped the ability and the knowledge of doing the job. Finally, we're going to follow up, stressing quality and safety, encouraging questions, and so on. So that's the proper method of instruction, and it'll resolve those problems that have to do with where people don't know or can't do. And then finally, if it's a problem concerning they don't care or won't do, then we apply job relations. In the previous step, we thought about what might be a good thing to do, and then here in step 3, we're going to actually take that action. Once we decided, what's the best course of action, then we take that action, make sure that we get help when needed, refer it to our supervisor for proper authority, watching the timing, getting agreement, and so on. Again, keeping in mind, keeping in consideration that person's feelings and how they're going to be taking and resolving the problem. So that's step number 3. And again, as you can see, this is just an out-and-out usage of the TWI methods. The TWI methods are job methods improvement, job instruction, and job relations. So when you learn those methods, you can apply these things properly. And finally, step 4 is to check and evaluate results. Here again, you want to make sure that the correction has been made is successful. You want to keep a view on the human angle, looking out for resistance or resentment to any of those changes that you've made. Keeping a view that any changes that you do make may in and of themselves create new problems, so we keep an eye on that. And then evaluate the results by consulting our records and preventing reoccurrence. So that's the final check and evaluation stage. So now we've covered, and again, very briefly, but we've covered the TWI problem-solving method. Let's go back to where we started today's discussion when comparing it to the Toyota problem-solving method. If we compare these two, what do we find now that we've taken a look at both of them? My feeling is that the Toyota problem-solving approach, especially, and it's a good one, because it looks at principles, it looks at values. In other words, it takes a very high-level approach to problem-solving. It takes a very team-oriented approach where you get lots of people involved in order to get to the root cause and find the correct countermeasure. By using brainstorming techniques, consensus building, and so on, we get everybody measures to resolving the problems. Everybody's on the same team. Everybody's on board. Everybody's made a contribution, and so they're committed to the correction. I think it's a very effective method, and it works well. The TWI approach, on the other hand, is more of an on-the-ground view. In other words, it's designed for supervisors, frontline supervisors, to use their TWI skills, their JI, JM, and JR skills to solve problems that are right in their laps, right in their hands at the time. So whereas the Toyota approach takes a very high-level view, I think the TWI approach is much more of a ground-level view for individual supervisors so that they can recognize problems that they have right in front of them and then take the proper actions using their TWI skills in order to correct those problems, finding the root cause and correcting those problems. So by utilizing the TWI skills that they may already have or are learning to develop, they're going to be able to resolve and correct problems that they're faced with each and every day. So from that point of view, my feeling is that these two approaches are very compatible, completely compatible. In fact, I feel that they can be used. Both of them can be used. They can be used in tandem, depending on the level of the problem, depending on the content or complexity of the problem. you may want to go one or the other way. But certainly when it comes to frontline supervisors utilizing TWI as a tool for good work, in other words, in order to achieve those responsibilities of good production at the proper cost, I think that the TWI method is an excellent approach for a lot of reasons. It's a good review of the TWI methods. If you're already training your supervisors on TWI methods and they've been using them, by now applying them to a problem-solving approach, it helps them to revamp those methods, gives them more inspiration to use them, gives renewed meaning to the TWI methods, of course, this time with a focus on problem-solving, specific problem-solving. It also helps frontline supervisors develop that ability to use the TWI skills they already possess in order to solve everyday problems. So in other words, it lets them use the skills that they're already putting into play with the focus on solving everyday problems. So those are advantages you can get if your people already have TWI skills. If they don't, if you're new to TWI or if this is something you're just thinking about, the TWI problem-solving approach can be used as an introduction to the TWI methods. You can put them out there and show what they mean and how they can be used, and then your frontline supervisors then can, as they go about problem-solving, they can go about learning and mastering the TWI methods. So that kind of brings us to the end of my comments. I know it's a quick overview, and we've covered a lot of things, especially because the TWI problem-solving approach, covers all of the TWI methods. So there's just an immense amount of material that we could talk about. Just going over any one of the TWI methodologies, is a lot of things to cover. But you can find out more if you'd like to. If you're new to TWI and you want to find out more about the methods, you can look at the TWI workbook that covers the skills of JI, JM, and JR. As Dwayne pointed out at the beginning of our presentation, we have a new book that's just hot off the presses, Implementing TWI. This really talks about more how to roll out a TWI program with lots of case studies. And in fact, the last chapter of Implementing TWI is devoted entirely to this problem-solving approach, which we've gone over today. So you can, if you get that book, you can hear all the comments that I made today in a much more comprehensive and written down a way you can study it in the last chapter of the book. So that brings me to the end of my comments. I think there's some questions. Do we want to pick up some questions, Wayne?
Yeah, Patrick. Most of the questions that come in were either addressed during your presentation or are going to be addressed in a follow-up email.
Okay.
Actually, okay, here's one. Please talk at some point about how to relate the method to other types of problems that are softer or people-driven. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, no. In that case, I think if of course, a lot of problems are people-driven, and in fact, the job relations component of TWI, which is one of the three, is devoted exactly and completely, to those soft people-related problems. So I think the answer to the question there is really, to when you get to a problem that's people-related, the job relations four-step method, is designed just for that. And I wish we could go into the details of that. Boy, I could talk for hours on how job relations can help you, with those soft problems. So taking a look at job relations would be the way to go for that person with the question.
Okay. Well, it looks like more are coming in here. How many companies are using TWI problem solving?
At this stage, really, we just rolled this out last year, about a year ago, and so I would say just a handful, maybe 2 or 3 that that I know of. Others are, we're just kind of getting our feet wet with it. And the main thing is that problem solving is really focused on companies that have already started down that journey of getting 1 or 2 or 3 of the TWI methods into place. So Several of those companies now have approached us, and so we're just kind of getting started rolling this out. We just put the materials together about a year ago, and so we've got 2 or 3 companies now that are kind of up and rolling on this. But as we move forward, we'll have much more experience with it.
Do you have any examples in healthcare, by any chance?
In healthcare, yes, we do, but we're just in the early stages of healthcare implementation. I'm working with a few hospitals, hospital groups, and at this point in healthcare, we're really just working on job instruction and standard work, and so we're just taking those first few steps in terms of getting good job instruction skills started. So we don't have any problem-solving examples yet, but we're on the way to that.
Can you discuss how a plant organizes the JI information?
Okay, actually, there's a great case study in implementing TWI, and in there they talk about how JI was incorporated into their quality program. There's a lot of discussion in there, so I recommend taking a look at that. But the key issues were how can we make sure that job instruction aligns with our quality program in terms of following standard work, following, and also in terms of documentation control, making sure that the JI breakdown sheets sync up to the SOPs, are controlled in the quality system. And so that's a great question, and I don't have time to answer it here, but if you look in implementing TWI, you'll see we talk about that, and it's very interesting how well, actually, I think, I was surprised myself how well JI fits into these quality programs.
Okay, well, that takes us to the end of the webinar. Patrick, I'd like to thank you for your time, and thanks for your contribution to introducing TWI not only here in the United States, but really around the world, and certainly look forward to reading your and Bob's newest book. To our listeners, look for an email from me shortly. That email will include a link to download today's presentation, as well as some information regarding the 5th Annual TWI Summit. The summit is an annual event you don't want to miss if you're considering a TWI deployment or are already engaged in one. The next summit's being held in Orlando at Walt Disney World's, I forget the name of it.
Boardwalk.
The Boardwalk, thank you, Patrick. It's being held at Disney World May 17th and 18th. So thanks for participating in today's webinar, and I hope to see you at the next TWI Summit.